The woman's fingers tightened around her phone as she spoke urgently to the 911 operator. "I'm telling you, this black kid is causing trouble." Her voice rose with each word, conviction evident in her tone. The teenager in question stood nearby, unaware of the brewing storm. A black SUV screeched to a halt, drawing all eyes. The city's mayor emerged, her face masked with controlled fury. The accuser's mouth fell open in shock as recognition dawned. The mayor's voice cut through the tension, quiet but steely. "That troublemaker you're reporting is my son." In that moment, the woman's certainty crumbled. She had made a grave mistake, one that would ripple far beyond this street corner. Jeremiah leaned against an oak tree, enjoying the afternoon sun in Oakwood Park. He breathed in deeply, savoring the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. His mom had promised to pick him up soon, and he was content to wait, lost in his thoughts. A prickling sensation at the back of his neck pulled Jeremiah from his reverie. He opened his eyes, scanning the park until his gaze landed on a middle-aged white woman, Karen Whitman, as he would later learn. She was seated on a nearby bench, staring at him with naked suspicion, her lips pressed into a thin line. Karen's eyes narrowed as she rose from the bench, her movements stiff and purposeful. She approached Jeremiah, her face a mask of determination. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "This is a family park, not a place for troublemakers. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." The implication in her words stung. Jeremiah, now 14 years old, felt a mix of confusion and anger rising within him. "Ma'am, I'm not causing any trouble," he insisted, struggling to keep his voice calm. "I'm just waiting for my mom. I have every right to be here." Karen's face flushed with anger. She reached into her purse, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. Jeremiah's eyes widened in disbelief. He stood up slowly, holding his hands out in a pleading gesture. "Please, there's no need for that," he pleaded, fear creeping into his voice. "I'm telling the truth. My mom will be here any minute." But Karen had made up her mind. With a look of grim satisfaction, she dialed 911, her eyes never leaving Jeremiah's face. "Hello. Yes, I need to report a suspicious teenager in Oakwood Park," she said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air. Jeremiah stood rooted to the spot, a cold wave of dread washing over him as Karen continued to speak to the dispatcher, painting him as a threat. He felt a profound sense of injustice settle in his chest. He was being criminalized for simply existing in a public space, his presence deemed suspicious solely because of the color of his skin. The reality of the situation hit him hard. In a matter of minutes, police would arrive. Jeremiah knew all too well how quickly such encounters could turn dangerous for young black boys like himself. He prayed his mother would arrive soon, even as he steeled himself for what was to come. The screech of tires pierced the air as two police cruisers rolled to a stop, their lights painting the park in alternating flashes of red and blue. Jeremiah's heart pounded, a chill running down his spine as the officers approached. He'd seen countless videos of similar encounters gone wrong, and now he was at the center of one. The officers walked toward him with measured steps, eyes scanning the scene. Jeremiah stood perfectly still, hands visible at his sides, remembering his mother's lessons about police interactions. "What's the problem here?" the taller officer, Officer Reynolds, asked, his gaze shifting between Jeremiah and Karen. Karen stepped forward, her words tumbling out. "This young man's been loitering for hours. He refused to leave when I asked. I'm concerned about the family's safety." Jeremiah felt frustration surge at Karen's distorted version of events. He opened his mouth to speak, but the second officer, Officer Mills, cut him off. "We'll get to you in a moment, son," Officer Mills said, his tone making it clear that Jeremiah's side was secondary. The officers questioned Karen, nodding as she embellished her account. With each passing moment, Jeremiah felt the situation slipping further out of his control. Finally, they turned to him, their expressions guarded. "All right, young man," Officer Reynolds said. "Explain yourself. What are you doing here?" Jeremiah took a deep breath. "I'm just waiting for my mom to pick me up," he explained, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I come here often. I wasn't bothering anyone." The officers exchanged a glance. "Do you have any ID?" Officer Mills asked, his hand resting on his belt. "No, sir," Jeremiah replied, aware of how this might sound. "I'm only 14. I don't have a driver's license." As the questioning continued, Jeremiah struggled to articulate his side. The officer's skeptical tone and rapid-fire questions left him overwhelmed. He could feel the situation escalating, the officers' postures becoming more rigid. A small crowd had gathered, several onlookers recording with their phones. Jeremiah's anxiety grew, knowing this humiliating moment could end up on social media. Just as the situation seemed poised to worsen, the low rumble of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up at the park entrance. The officer's demeanor shifted instantly as the driver's door opened. Their eyes widened in recognition, and Jeremiah felt relief wash over him. His mom had arrived. Mayor Angela Thompson stepped out of the SUV, her presence commanding immediate attention. The park fell silent as she approached, her eyes fixed on her son. Jeremiah's shoulders sagged with relief, but the tension in his mother's jaw told him this was far from over. "What's going on here?" Mayor Thompson's voice cut through the silence, each word crisp and measured. The officers snapped to attention, their earlier confidence evaporating. Karen's accusatory stance crumbled under the mayor's steely gaze. Mayor Thompson surveyed the scene, the cruisers, the crowd, and her son's rigid posture. "I'd like an explanation," she said. "Why are my officers questioning my son in a public park?" The taller officer cleared his throat, his authority replaced with hesitation. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual." "Suspicious?" Mayor Thompson interrupted, one eyebrow arching. "What made my son suspicious?" Karen stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He was just hanging around for hours. I thought—" "You thought what, exactly?" Mayor Thompson's voice was quiet but sharp. "That a black teenager in a public park must be up to no good?" Karen's face flushed, her certainty dissolving. Mayor Thompson turned back to the officers, her expression a mix of disappointment and determination. "Gentlemen, this situation highlights a critical issue," she said. "Did you consider the possibility of bias in the call? Did you approach my son with the same presumption of innocence you'd give any other citizen?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mayor Thompson placed a protective hand on Jeremiah's shoulder, her voice softening. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Jeremiah nodded, the knot in his chest finally loosening. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the lingering fear. Turning to the crowd, Mayor Thompson's expression was resolute. "This incident underscores the need for comprehensive anti-bias training in our police force and in our community. No child should feel criminalized for simply existing in a public space." She fixed Karen with a stern look. "I hope this serves as a wake-up call. Your unfounded suspicions could have had serious consequences. We all must examine our biases and work to create a community where everyone feels safe and welcome." The crowd fell silent, absorbing her words. Too often, we allow unfounded fears to dictate our actions, with devastating consequences for innocent people. Marcus, still visibly shaken, found the courage to speak. "I was just sitting here, enjoying the day," he said, his voice growing steadier. "In minutes, I went from feeling safe to feeling like a criminal. That's not right." The rawness of Marcus's words resonated with many in the crowd. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers, punctuated by quiet nods. Linda, the woman who had called the police, stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't mean any harm," she said softly. "I was just trying to keep the park safe." Mayor Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "The point is, ma'am, it shouldn't matter whose son he is. Every person deserves to exist in public spaces without being criminalized because of the color of their skin." She turned back to the crowd. "This incident makes it clear we need to do more. Today, I'm announcing the implementation of comprehensive anti-bias training for our police force and city employees." The announcement drew mixed reactions. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. A man near the front, identified later as Tom Henderson, called out, "How's training supposed to change anything?" Mayor Thompson acknowledged the question with a calm nod. Anti-bias training isn't a magic fix, but it's a critical first step. It raises awareness and gives our public servants the tools to recognize and address their own biases. This incident will serve as a real-world example of how quickly assumptions can escalate into dangerous situations. As the crowd continued debating, Mayor Thompson turned to Marcus. In a quieter moment, she pulled him into a gentle hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You handled this with more grace than anyone should have to." Marcus leaned into his mother's embrace, exhaustion and relief washing over him. "Do you think things can really change?" he asked softly. Mayor Thompson met her son's gaze. "Change is never easy," she said firmly. "But moments like these, they can be the spark for something bigger. We just have to be brave enough to keep the conversation going." As they made their way back to the SUV, leaving behind a park buzzing with intense conversations, it was clear the day's events had struck a nerve. The incident forced the community to confront the reality of racial profiling head-on, and the discussions that followed echoed through City Hall, police precincts, and family dinner tables for weeks to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Oakwood Park, the impact of that afternoon lingered. In the days that followed, conversations sparked across the city. People grappled with uncomfortable truths about their own biases, re-examining moments they once dismissed as harmless. The Oakwood Gazette published a series of articles exploring the roots of racial profiling, while community leaders organized town halls to address the issue directly. Marcus, still processing the weight of his experience, found an unexpected ally in his school's debate club. When he shared his story, his classmates listened with wide eyes, realizing just how close to home this issue truly was. It was a stark reminder that the fight against prejudice was far from over, even in their seemingly progressive town. Mayor Thompson pushed forward with her plans for comprehensive anti-bias training. Despite pushback, she stood firm. "We can't afford complacency," she repeated in interviews and council meetings. "Every unjust interaction chips away at the foundation of trust our community depends on." In the weeks that followed, small changes began to take root. Police officers participated in community outreach programs, fostering dialogue and understanding. Local businesses proudly displayed signs celebrating inclusivity. A vibrant new mural bloomed in Oakwood Park, celebrating the city's diversity, a reminder that every voice matters. Civil rights advocate Keon Harrell visited the community and shared his own experience. There are thousands of black men sitting in prison today who were falsely accused, he said. That's why we have to confront incidents like this before they escalate. The incident at Oakwood Park had been a wake-up call, challenging everyone to examine their biases and take active steps toward building a more just society. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Because how we respond to prejudice shapes the world we live in. And silence? Silence was no longer an option. Join our growing community of people who believe in justice, empathy, and the power of storytelling. Subscribe and be part of a movement that values real stories and real change. Make every story count. Later that evening, Marcus sat on the front porch of their home, the cool breeze carrying the faint sounds of life in the neighborhood. His mind replayed the afternoon over and over. The fear, the helplessness, the relief, and finally, the pride in seeing his mother stand up not just for him, but for something much bigger. Angela Thompson stepped outside, her hands wrapped around 2 steaming mugs of tea. She handed one to Marcus and sat beside him, their shoulders brushing in quiet comfort. "You know," she said softly, "when I was your age, my mother used to tell me that the world might not always see me for who I really am. They'd see my skin, my hair, and make up a story before I even said a word." Marcus stared into his cup, the weight of those words sinking in. "But why?" he asked, his voice raw with frustration. "Why do people still think like that? After everything, after all the protests, the speeches, the marches, how is it still like this?" Angela sighed, her gaze drifting out toward the darkening sky. "Because change isn't just about laws, baby. It's about hearts. It's about unlearning what the world taught you to fear. And that takes time. More time than it should." Marcus shifted, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "But I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there, existing. Why is that enough to make someone scared of me?" Angela turned to face him fully, her hand resting gently on his knee. "Because fear is easy," she said. "It's easier than understanding. It's easier than looking at someone and seeing their humanity instead of a stereotype. But that doesn't make it right." Tears burned at the corners of Marcus's eyes, but he blinked them away. "It's not fair," he whispered. "No, it's not," Angela agreed. "And it's okay to be angry. But you can't let that anger turn you bitter. You take it, and you turn it into something powerful. Your voice, your story, they matter. Every time you speak your truth, you make it harder for people to pretend this isn't happening." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling between them. "Will things ever really change?" Marcus asked again, quieter this time. Angela smiled softly, brushing a hand over his hair. "They already are. Change doesn't always roar like thunder, baby. Sometimes it's a whisper. In a classroom, in a town hall, in a quiet conversation between a mother and her son. And every whisper adds up." Marcus leaned his head on her shoulder, finding comfort in her warmth. "I'll keep telling my story," he promised. "And I'll be right beside you," Angela said, "because silence is what lets this keep happening. And we are done being silent." The two of them sat together as the stars blinked into the sky above, a quiet strength growing between them. The kind of strength born from pain, love, and the unshakable belief that a better world was worth fighting for. In the days and weeks following the park incident, the story didn't just fade away. It became the talk of the town, and everyone found themselves forced to look in the mirror and ask, "Do I carry the same prejudices? Have I ever passed by someone different from me and felt fear for no reason? Schools dedicated special lessons for open discussions. Students spoke up about their fears and questions, and some even admitted that they had grown up with ideas planted in their minds without realizing it. The conversations were difficult and sometimes painful, but they were real, and for the first time, the issue wasn't swept under the rug. Marcus found himself standing in the school auditorium, telling his story to his classmates. His voice was steady, but his heart trembled. He spoke about the fear he felt, the humiliation, and the sense of being exposed, like an enemy, before anyone even knew his name. "I'm not here to ask for your pity," Marcus said, looking directly into their eyes. "I'm here to ask you one thing. The next time you see me, or someone who doesn't look like you, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, am I seeing this person with my own eyes, or through the eyes of the fear I was taught?" At the end of his speech, there was a heavy silence. But it wasn't the silence of rejection. It was the silence of people thinking, perhaps for the first time, about something they had always taken for granted. Then the applause started. Soft at first, then growing louder and louder until most of the students and teachers were standing, clapping for him. Not because they had solved the problem, but because they were finally starting to hear it. At the city council meeting, Angela Thompson stood before the citizens, the same place where she had fought political battles before, but this time the battle was personal. "We won't fix everything with one meeting or one law," she said firmly. "But we can plant different seeds for our children. We can teach them to see each other as human beings, not threats. We can show them that courage isn't just about standing up to others, but also about admitting our own flaws and working to fix them." On the walls of small neighborhood shops, new signs appeared. "All are welcome." And in the very park where the story began, children of all colors painted a mural with their hands joined together, with the words written above, "Stronger Together." A few days later, Marcus walked through the same park, the place where, to one person, he had been nothing more than a threat. But now, he walked with his head held high, not because he had won, but because he knew he had become part of something bigger than himself. A change that started with a painful moment, but grew with the power of truth and the voices of those willing to learn instead of fear.